Hey folks, this is Kelani. Another week has passed, another server reset has come and gone, and you would think we could go at least 1 week without lighting the torches or sharpening the pitchforks, but nope, Blizzard has done it again. From the look of Reddit and several forum sites, the mobs are gathering once more for a variety of reasons. There's confusion about the Mythic Plus weekly cash rewards, or lack of them. Warfronts have become even less enticing, and I guess the dev team might be getting a little bored of RNG. Let's have a look at what's come to light with the first weekly reset after raids have launched. So one of the big pieces of news right now is that the Mythic Plus weekly cash rewards aren't going to work at all like they were on the beta. If you're a little out of the loop on this one, for the majority of the beta, if you were running Mythic Plus dungeons, you could get up to 3 pieces of loot in your weekly cache on reset day. Some of these pieces were weighted in favour of receiving Azerite armor pieces and weapons, which makes a lot of sense when you think about it. You can't actually get Azerite armor from Mythic Plus dungeons. It's not on their loot table at all. That's probably because of the way Azerite armor works. The higher the item level, the more powerful the traits on each piece of gear. Having set item levels means you don't have widely fluctuating trait powers or numbers to balance, which should make the whole job a lot easier. But Mythic Plus loot scales higher and higher depending on the level of key you're running. That's just how Mythic Plus loot works. So to keep Azerite armor as a fixed item level, Mythic Plus dungeons just can't reward the stuff. Easy fix, right? Except for the problem where any player who isn't taking part in raids probably isn't going to see many upgrades from their Mythic Dungeon 340 Azerite armor pieces, which doesn't seem all that fun, and with Azerite armor being a huge part of this expansion, it doesn't really seem fair either. So when we saw that we could potentially get 3 items from every weekly cache, and we were more likely to get at least 1 piece of Azerite armor, that seemed like a really great compromise. Azerite armor doesn't drop from Mythic Plus, but there's a really good chance you'll get one from your weekly cache. Except we can't get up to 3 items anymore, it's going to be just the 1 item like all throughout Legion. I can understand why a lot of players might be a little upset to hear that our potential loot is being reduced. That never feels great. A lot of fan sites and YouTubers were talking about the 3 items you could get from Mythic Plus caches, so we were hyping everyone up and setting up a lot of people for disappointment. I apologise for my part in that. I was really excited about the whole thing as well, and obviously didn't have the correct information before the game went live. But it seems like pretty much no one did. If you were looking for information about the weekly caches before this week's reset, chances are you would have found the same info. You can get up to 3 items from your weekly cache. I think not getting as much loot as you thought you might is definitely disappointing, but this misinformation wasn't at any point cleared up before Battle for Azeroth launched. There wasn't anything correcting the wrong information on sites like Wowhead. We didn't hear anything about it just before the expansion launched, and there wasn't even anything mentioned before people started asking questions. Players on North American realms were opening up their caches, only getting 1 item, being a little disappointed, comparing notes with friends and guildies, and I guess someone eventually thought, this can't be right, everyone I've talked to only has 1 item, let's ask the devs and see what's going on. Only then did we find out that the caches weren't going to follow the beta example and would work just like they did in Legion. My major problem with this whole thing isn't the change itself. I think walking into 3 pieces of Mythic raiding gear for clearing a bugged key last week is kind of ridiculous, but it's that it wasn't communicated to anyone for the last few months. I guess I shouldn't be too surprised with the disaster of Warfronts and the lack of communication about an entire system in Battle for Azeroth, but I've been blindsided a little bit these last few weeks. I love World of Warcraft and I love Blizzard games, but they really have been dropping the ball here, and I can't quite figure out why. Whatever the reason, it definitely doesn't leave a great impression. Oh, and just in case you were wondering, anyone who got a bugged key last week and cleared them, yeah, they got a bugged key this week again. Some of my guildies are running around with plus 15 and plus 16 keys that they have no right to, simply because they wouldn't be able to get a plus 15 key going through the dungeons and timers properly. That one bug is going to affect Mythic Plus dungeons for weeks to come, so strap yourselves in. Getting back to the weekly caches, you should only ever expect to get 1 item in your box going forward. If you haven't been interested in running Uldia so far in the hopes that you would be able to get your Azerite pieces from your weekly cache, I might reconsider that if you're interested in progressing your item level. 1 chance per week from the entire loot table of every dungeon doesn't leave you with fantastic odds for getting an Azerite armor piece you actually want. This might be the most frustrating part of this whole problem, because any Azerite armor piece that's actually good for you inside dungeons will require an insane amount of luck to obtain at a higher item level. You just can't get them anywhere else but your weekly Mythic plus cache. If you're not raiding or the raid Azerite armor pieces don't have what you want, you might be looking at 340 Azerite armor pieces for a very long time. Which begs the question, if they weren't happy with up to 3 items in the weekly cache deal, why can't we get Azerite armor from Mythic Plus? The weekly rewards scale to provide fixed item level Azerite armor, why can't the dungeons themselves? Award 340 Azerite armor pieces for keys 2 through 4, 355 pieces for 5 through 9, and 370 Azerite armor for 10 and above. That's the same item level or lower when compared to the gear that drops from each Mythic Plus key. Sure, some folks might be a little annoyed that they get a 355 Azerite armor piece instead of a 365 normal piece of gear, but I'm sure they would forgive you if you told them their only other source of Azerite gear would be the weekly cache or raiding. I thought the 3 items per week was a compromise of Azerite armor not being included on the loot table for Mythic Plus dungeons, but we're left without either option right now. When asked about the changes, the dev team replied saying they decided not to go forward with the idea of getting 1 to 3 items in your cache because the players who only got 1 item didn't enjoy the system. So hopefully we see less RNG implemented in the future, because that's basically what they're saying. Random rewards aren't the most fun when you're left with the scraps. Players who got their worst legendary first in Legion didn't particularly enjoy that either. The same can be said for relics in the Netherlight Crucible. RNG was an integral part of Legion, so I'm kind of surprised to see that response. I'm guessing that part of their motivation was tied to how quickly 3 pieces of 380 gear would allow players to gear up though, because that seems to be the reason why they hotfixed the Warfronts queue. Up until yesterday you could queue into the Warfronts scenario with whatever item level you happen to have, providing you were at least level 120 and had the Warfronts unlocked. That made Warfronts incredibly lucrative when it came to alts and gearing up quickly, because you were guaranteed an item level 340 piece of loot for every completion. You might get a few duplicates here and there, but within a few hours you could be rocking a full set of 340 gear, and of course 1 piece of 370 gear from the weekly quest. Well, anyone trying that after today will see an item level requirement on the Warfronts queue. You will have to have an item level of 320 to be able to join the Warfronts scenario, so you're going to have to do a few heroic dungeons before you can hop into the Warfronts for that sweet 340 gear, which will definitely be disappointing to anyone who heard about the potential of gearing up through Warfronts, only to be a little too late to the party, which sort of includes every Alliance player, because they haven't actually had the chance to do any Warfronts scenarios at all at this point, so the Horde gets to gear up all of their ults in a single day, while the Alliance has to sit back and watch, and then before they get the chance to do the same, the system gets changed. Talk about rubbing salt into the wounds, that's a little silly when piled on top of all of the other issues that Warfronts have had so far, and they've only been active for a week. A lot of players seem to think the reason the item level requirement was introduced was to force you through the typical gearing path of normal dungeons into heroic dungeons, and then to choose between Warfronts and Mythic dungeons. But Warfronts aren't really on the same level as Mythic dungeons. You can queue straight into them, several players are usually AFK through half the scenario, and you can actually solo the entire thing if you really wanted to. There's very little chance of losing, and you're guaranteed the loot. All that's left is to consider how time efficient the Warfronts are. Players were treating Warfronts as a catch-up mechanic for alts that only comes around once a month, but I guess that wasn't their true purpose, or at least it's not going to be anymore. On the topic of Warfronts, the weekly reset taught us a few things about Warfronts that we sort of assumed wouldn't be the case. There's a whole bunch of rares down in Arathi Highlands, and typically rares either reset on a daily basis or a weekly basis for this kind of content to encourage you to keep coming back for some more attempts at their loot and mounts. Well, it looks like the rares down in Arathi don't reset on either of those tables, because after server reset, players who had killed them already couldn't get credit for them again. So it looks like they're going to be on a cycle reset, so every 4 weeks, or reset whenever Arathi Highlands changes hands, which seems more likely, but that still puts their reset timer at 2 weeks instead of the expected 1. The same actually goes for the World Boss, which have had weekly resets for a very long time at this point. Alliance players who are probably still sulking about having to wait another 2 weeks for the scenario went down into Arathi to try and find solace in the fact that they should have another shot at some 370 loot, only to find out that the world bosses don't reset weekly either. So instead of 4 weeks of Arathi rare farming, you only have 2 weeks, and instead of 2 attempts at the world boss per 4-week cycle, you only have 1. That just reduces the amount of content you have access to via the Warfront system even further, which was already kind of thin to begin with. Personally, I'm not too bothered about the Warfront changes. They should have had an item level requirement from the start, but the problem really comes back to the cycles. If both factions had access to a Warfront, this wouldn't have been as much of an issue, but the Alliance just won't get the same time frame to freely gear up their freshly dinked 120s ever again. The fact that the rares and world bosses only reset every 2 weeks instead of 1 is just mind-boggling to me. Warfronts don't offer a great deal of content to begin with, but sure, let's keep it as low as possible. And the weekly Mythic Plus cash rewarding 3 items would have been a bit bonkers, but to just happily sit by while everyone thinks that's going to be the case and not say anything about it is really just strange in my opinion. I strongly believe that Azerite armor from Mythic Plus needs to be addressed in one form or another, and if they're not going down the route of rewarding more items in the weekly cash, which they said they were doing in one of the Q&As by the way, then something else has to change before that becomes another problem people stick to the battle for Azeroth board. We've had a bit of a shaky start to this expansion. I think there's a lot of missed opportunities here, and I really hope the dev team has something amazing to show us at BlizzCon, because I think a lot of people's patience is wearing a little thin right now. What do you think about the Mythic Cache only rewarding one piece of loot? What about the Warfront item level changes or the 2-week reset timers? Leave all your thoughts in the comments section below. A big thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon. You can see their names floating by on screen. If you want to join these lovely guys and gals, you can find a link in the description below. Remember to leave a like just below the video before you leave, and if you want to see more, make sure to subscribe. But apart from that, thanks for watching folks, good luck and have fun, and as always I will see you next time.